Horror movies and true crime are usually best kept at a bit of a distance. True crime deserves respect, careful accuracy, and objectivity to make sure that the coverage doesn't make the situation worse. And horror deserves the theatricality, the careful handling of the lore, and the subjectivity to get our hearts pumping and our minds racing. But what happens when you combine the two? Do you play by the rules of both? Or do all of the rules go off the table? Welcome to another episode of horror movies you didn't know were based on true stories. This time, I'm looking at films that really blur the line between where the truth ends and where creativity begins. If you want to know the hidden true stories behind Jaws, It, and other horror films that literally sent audiences and filmmakers into a nervous breakdown, stick around to the end of this video. Jaws takes us to the summer town of Amity Island, where Police Chief Martin Brody is adjusting to a life by the ocean. When a young woman is killed in a suspected shark attack, Brody pushes to close the beaches, but Mayor Larry Vaughn refuses, fearing the impact on the town's 4th of July tourist season. After a second attack claims the life of a young boy and panic spreads through Amity, Brody joins forces with marine biologist Matt Hooper and hardened fisherman Quint to hunt the shark responsible. With only a few key changes, Jaws follows the same core structure as the novel that it was based on, Jaws, written by Peter Benchley. Many of the book's human conflicts are removed in the film, including an affair between Hooper and Brody's wife Ellen, as well as a subplot involving Mayor Larry Vaughn being pressured by the mafia to keep the beaches open. By reducing these human dramas, the film shifts the focus towards the shark itself, the attacks, the impact on the town, and the drive that it creates among those determined to hunt it. That shift brings the story closer to the real-world events that first inspired Peter Benchley's story. Benchley's earliest inspiration for Jaws grew out of a childhood fascination for sharks developed during fishing trips with his father in Nantucket.
I was a kid in Nantucket and we would go fishing and we'd go out and look for swordfish and catch none, but we'd see the sharks littering the ocean and we began to catch them. For lack of anything else, you pay $100 a day once a year, you might as well catch something. And so we started catching sharks, and I got fascinated with the length of time it took them to die and the way they behaved and the general air of primitive malice or malevolence, I guess, that surrounded them. And I read as much as I could about them and learned a lot.
That fascination stayed with him for years, but it wasn't until 1964 that the idea for the novel started to take shape after Benchley came across an article about a fisherman named Frank Mundus, known for chartering trips for clients looking to hunt large sharks. In 1964, he caught an enormous great white off the coast of Montauk.
I had been thinking for years about a story about a shark that attacks people and what would happen if it came in and wouldn't go away, and I hadn't done anything with it really. And then in 1964 I read a story about a shark fisherman off Long Island who caught a 4,550 pound great white shark off the beaches of Long Island. And I thought, wow, what would happen if one of these things came in and wouldn't go away?
The shark's weight was never officially confirmed, having been estimated rather than properly weighed. Like me trying to haggle for a discount at the frozen yogurt place. But the story still had a huge impact on Benchley. He even kept the article, later using it to challenge anyone who questioned the events of Jaws. In his nonfiction book titled Shark Trouble, he explains,
"Folded in my wallet was a yellowed 1964 clipping from the New York Daily News that reported the capture of a 4,550-pound great white shark off Long Island. I would brandish it at the first hint of disbelief that such an animal could exist, let alone that it might attack boats and eat people."
In Jaws, the shark, nicknamed Bruce, is an exaggerated version of a real great white shark.
That's a 20-footer.
25. 3 tons on them.
3 tons is roughly 6,000 pounds, which isn't too different from the size of the shark that first sparked the idea, assuming that the estimation of its size wasn't a huge exaggeration, which it probably was. People tend to let their emotions cloud their judgment when estimating the magnitude of a spectacular feat. Sorry, Yankee fans, Babe Ruth did not hit a 575-foot home run. One of the most reliably documented great white sharks alive today is a female known as Deep Blue, measuring around 20 feet long and weighing approximately 4,400 pounds. Even those figures are still estimates rather than official measurements, though. The shark wasn't the only source of inspiration for this story, though. Frank Mundus, the shark hunter, is believed to have been the inspiration for the hardened, eccentric fisherman Quint. According to the frequently asked questions on Frank's website, when asked if Quint is his on-screen counterpart, Mundus claimed, yes, he was. He knew how to handle people the same way I did. He also used similar shark fishing techniques based on my methods. The only difference is that I used handheld harpoons after field testing harpoon guns and discovering that they didn't work. The dart would pull out after hitting the fish. While Peter Benchley has never officially or legally confirmed that Quint was based on Mundus, he did go on a fishing trip with him in 1974 before the novel's publication for an episode of American Sportsman. This footage seems to be lost media though. When asked about Mundus's claim, Benchley said, "Lord knows, the character Quint is based on a lot of fishermen that I know," leading a lot of people to see this as him saying, "Yeah, it's based on him, but I'm not gonna say it out loud so he doesn't come around looking for royalties." Both are captains of a boat named after animals. Mundus helms the Cricket II, and Quint's boat is called Orca. Mundus listed one of his hobbies as aggravating people on his website, something that Quint also seems to take pleasure in.
Come on, Chief, this isn't no Boy Scout picnic. See, you got your rubbers. Here lies the body of Mary Lee, died at the age of 103. For 15 years, she kept her virginity. Not a bad record for this vicinity.
And both rely on harpoons to hunt sharks, though Mundus favored the handheld version over the harpoon gun used on screen. All of these similarities were present in the book, but the film's version of Quint also took some inspiration from elsewhere. Making videos like this one means spending a lot of time going down internet rabbit holes. One minute you're researching a horror movie, the next you're reading old newspaper archives from 50 years ago, trying to separate fact from fiction. And when you need a break from all that, it makes sense to kill some time with today's sponsor, Giraffe. Editor, play the giraffe sound. That's not it. That's definitely not it. Giraffe is a free app that rewards you for playing mobile games. The way it works is pretty straightforward. You download the app, pick from a selection of games, and earn gems as you play and make progress. Those gems can then be exchanged for things like PayPal cash, Amazon gift cards, and other rewards. I know, it sounds like there must be a catch. So I asked how they can actually afford to do that. One thing I appreciated is that the app is pretty transparent about how it works. Game developers want people to discover their games, so they pay for that exposure, and Giraffe shares a portion of that revenue with the players. So if you want to discover some new mobile games, it's a win-win. All you have to do is download the app, spend time playing games, then reap the rewards. If you'd like to check it out, use my link below to download Giraffe and get up to 3,999 bonus gems as a welcome reward. If you're already spending time on mobile games, you might as well get something back for it. I may not know what a giraffe sounds like, but I'll still say thanks to Giraffe for sponsoring this video. The biggest point of inspiration in the movie version of Jaws comes from a Martha's Vineyard local named Craig Kingsbury, who also cameos briefly in the film as a character named Ben Gardner.
Craig Kingsbury was a local on Martha's Vineyard, and he was quite a character. He himself was a movie and a book, and had I not gotten Robert Shaw, and had I met him in an open casting call, I might have come very close to flirting with the idea of using him to play Quint, because he was the purest version of who in my mind Quint really was.
Just look at them side by side. You could easily sneak Kingsbury in there for one shot and half the audience wouldn't notice. Some of Quint's lines of dialogue came directly from Kingsbury, who had also been hired to coach Robert Shaw on the local dialect. The story goes that he had just started rattling off fishing stories and a production assistant recorded them, and some of his quotes ended up in the film.
Just in talking about fishing and sharking and this and that, Craig gave me some great lines. One of the lines was, you know, it's not like going out there to get a great, it's not like going out there to catch bluegills or tomicods. That's Craig's line.
I'll catch this bird for you, but it ain't gonna be easy. It's bad fish. Not like going down the pond chasing bluegills or tomicods.
But this video isn't titled Characters and Animals in Horror Films That Were Based on True Stories. It's called Horror Movies You Didn't Know Were Based on True Stories Volume 3. So let's get to what you're really here for, the shark attacks. One event that's often cited as the inspiration for the story is the series of shark attacks that took place along the Jersey Shore in the summer of 1916 while the US was in crisis, gripped by a brutal heat wave and the polio epidemic. With cities becoming increasingly unbearable, thousands of people fled to the coast in search of relief. With the beaches packed leading into their busiest holiday of the year, the bloodshed began on July 1st with 25-year-old Charles Van Sant, who had traveled from Philadelphia to Beach Haven to spend the 4th of July weekend with his family. That evening, he went for a swim before dinner with his sister Louise. He was joined in the water by a retriever who had been playing on the beach. Not long after entering the water, he was heard shouting, but those on the beach apparently later reported that they just assumed that he was calling to the dog. The shouting turns to screams as beneath the surface, a shark had taken hold of his left leg. A lifeguard named Alexander Ott rushed into the water and dragged Van Sant back to shore with the help of 2 bystanders. Witnesses claimed the shark remained attached to his leg until his body hit the sand. But this could just be a case of sensationalizing or exaggerating the events in later retellings. However, according to the National Library of Medicine, experiences of unpleasant occasions are remembered better than those experiences of a routine day. So while there is no definitive proof of this part, there's a chance that it's true. Van Sant's left thigh had been stripped to the bone, and there was a bite on his right leg. He was taken to the Ingleside Hospital, but his injuries were fatal, and he died later that evening at 6:45 p.m. Despite this attack, the beaches remained open, and 5 days later, it happened again. On July 6th, Charles Bruder, a bellhop at a local hotel in Spring Lake, went for a swim on his lunch break with a friend named Henry Nolan. Bruder swam further out into the water as Nolan headed back to the beach, but it wasn't long before he heard screaming. A woman on the beach alerted 2 lifeguards after spotting what she believed was a capsized canoe with a red hull roughly 120 meters from the shore. But as the men rowed closer to investigate, they realized the canoe was actually Bruder's body, and the red hull was his blood spreading through the water. As he was pulled into the boat, it became clear just how severe Bruder's injuries were. The shark had torn into his abdomen and taken both legs below the knee. He bled to death before they reached the shore. After the second attack, press coverage intensified, with the newspapers describing the creature as a man-eating shark and a sea wolf. Panic spread quickly, with beach attendance dropping sharply and resort towns suffering as tourists stayed away. In an effort to calm growing fears, a press conference was held on July 8th at the American Museum of Natural History. The scientists on the panel insisted that further attacks were unlikely, as at the time, many of them believed man-eating sharks didn't exist. But they still advised bathers to swim close to shore and to use netted bathing areas, which is kind of suspicious, because if these sharks aren't out there, then what are we hiding from in the deeper waters? Does the mayor have a secret mermaid mistress that people aren't supposed to know about? Local governments began increasing safety precautions. Beaches were enclosed with steel mesh fences, and armed boats patrolled the shore. But as people were focused on the ocean, the rogue shark made its way 30 miles inland to Matawan Creek, an inlet south of Long Island near the small New Jersey town of Keyport. On July 12th, a retired sailor spotted what he believed was an 8-foot shark moving up the creek, but when he reported what he'd seen, the townspeople dismissed his concerns. Around 2 p.m., a small group of local boys went swimming, and the boys noticed what they later described as a weather-beaten board drifting nearby. When a dorsal fin broke the surface of the water, the boys scrambled to get out of the creek, but before 12-year-old Lester Stillwell could climb to safety, he was dragged underwater. The surviving boys ran back to town for help, leading a man named Stanley Fisher to help search for the boy in the creek around 30 minutes later. After finding Stillwell's body, he turned back to shore, but was bitten by the shark, and lost hold of Lester in the struggle. Witnesses on the bank apparently struck the shark with oars until it released Fisher, but his injuries were so severe that he too later died in the hospital. But the Matawan masticator wasn't satiated just yet. Less than an hour after the attacks on Stillwell and Fisher, the shark attacked a boy named Joseph Dunn, who was swimming with his brother and his friends. His left leg was bitten, but he was rescued by his brother before the shark could kill him. He was taken to the hospital and was the only one of 5 people attacked who survived. 12-year-old Lester's torn and mangled remains were recovered 2 days later upstream from the creek. In just 2 days' time, the situation had escalated from rumors to a full-blown shark hunt. After the attacks, Matawan's mayor offered $100, or nearly $3,000 in 2026, to anyone who could hunt and kill the creature. So residents lined the creek with nets and even threw dynamite into the water in an attempt to destroy the shark. I've heard of blast fishing before, which is illegal now, but I always associate it with getting a bunch of little fish at once, not taking down a shark. Soon, the federal government chipped in, approving $5,000 in aid. That's basically $160,000 in 2026. Even the US President Woodrow Wilson got involved, deploying armed shark hunters that patrolled the shorelines in motorboats. But I guess shooting fish in the ocean isn't exactly like shooting fish in a barrel. I wonder how many times that joke was made during the shark hunt. It would go down as one of the biggest animal hunts in human history, but of course, that could just be another one of those overzealous estimations. Because the same day the patrolmen were sent out, July 14th, a man named Michael Schleicher caught a 7.5-foot great white shark while fishing in Raritan Bay. When the shark was cut open, Schleicher apparently reported finding fleshy material and bone that he believed to be the remains of the Matawan victims. From what I understand, scientists later identified the shark as an adolescent great white and confirmed the flesh was human. Schleicher, a trained taxidermist, stuffed and mounted the animal and displayed it in a Manhattan shop window, where crowds could pay money to see it. But at some point over the following years, the shark went missing. The only remaining photo of Schleitzer and his catch is from an article in the Bronx Home News. All in all, it lasted 14 days, affected 5 people along the New Jersey coastline, and saw only 1 survivor. By the FBI's criteria, this Matawan man-eater would be considered a serial killer. It seems plausible that the shark that was caught was responsible for at least one of the attacks, but whether this was the same beast who chomped down on all 5 victims is questionable. The identification methods for fatalities available in 1916 were limited, so some modern researchers, including George Burgess, curator of the International Shark Attack File, have questioned how accurately the remains could have been linked to the victims. Despite many believing the Jersey Shore shark attacks to be the inspiration for Peter Benchley's novel, the author corrected the New York Times after an article published in 2001, stating Jaws was not inspired by the 1916 attacks, which might lead some of you who have seen the movie to wonder if he was completely drunk when he said that. And if his semi-autobiographical novel Rummies is any indication, he might have been. Let's look at the facts. Both events began with a rogue shark entering waters close to shore around a 4th of July weekend. In Jaws, Mayor Larry Vaughn refuses to close the beaches after the initial attack, just as the officials in New Jersey had done.
But as you see, it's a beautiful day, the beaches are open, and people are having a wonderful time.
Mayor Vaughn has got to be one of the greatest fictional politicians ever. It's almost like he encompasses every facet of real politicians. After the public attack on young Alex Kintner, panic spreads across Amity Island, while Chief Brody introduces safety precautions, mirroring the aftermath of the second attack on Charles Bruder, which saw beaches fenced off and tourists afraid to go in the water. And if that wasn't enough, in the novel, Benchley has the young Alex and an older man killed within half an hour of each other, which matches the timescale of the deaths of young Lester Stillwell and the adult Stanley Fisher. In the movie, there's even a dog playing in the sea, just as there was when Bruder was attacked. Rip Pippet. He was a good boy. On his actual grave in real life, he's referred to as the star of Jaws, which might be a stretch, but it's fine. He deserves the praise. The novel contains plenty of similarities on its own, but the film adaptation adds a few more. There's the attack in the lagoon, which is really not too different from the attack in Matawan Creek. Following the death of her son, Mrs. Kintner offers a bounty for the shark's death, drawing amateur shark hunters to Amity, much like the shark hunters drawn in by the financial rewards that followed the Jersey Shore shark attacks. There's even a potential reference to the Matawan residents using dynamite. And of course, well, we've all seen the end of the movie, right? Before the true shark was taken down, another was captured, displayed, and photographed, almost certainly a reference to the true life events. But for Hooper and Brody, there was doubt over whether the shark that had been caught was responsible for the attacks, just like in 1916. Only in the film, Hooper cuts the shark open in an attempt to be sure. Obviously, we can't know for sure if the events of the 1916 attacks directly inspired Jaws, but this certainly reminds me of that time that I caught the writer of Final Destination trying to cover up the fact that his plane crash clearly took a page from the news. It could be Benchley's ego, trying to make it look like he's so creative that he came up with everything, or it could be that he doesn't want blowback from people who think that turning real trauma into a book for profit is distasteful. Though, I don't know about that. I'd think after 58 years, you're pretty much in the clear. It's hard to believe it's all just a coincidence, though. Benchley himself admitted to reading as much as he could to learn about the creatures that he'd been fascinated by as a child. In fact, 11 of the 14 books he wrote are about sharks, the ocean, or sea creatures. It's hard to imagine the Jersey Shore shark attacks never crossed his radar. Even if he wasn't researching sharks through interviews and archived newspaper articles the way that I did for this episode, he was born in New York and often fished just north of the same coastline as the attacks. At that point, the 1916 attacks were the deadliest in American history, and played a major role in changing both the public and scientific perception of sharks. Something like that tends to linger in the cultural consciousness and among communities. Hey, go Cubs. Years later, during World War II, 3 maritime disasters would go on to replace the Jersey attacks as the worst recorded shark fatalities in history, including the Cape San Juan, the Nova Scotia, and the USS Indianapolis, which was absent from Benchley's novel, but became the basis for Quint's backstory in the film.
1,100 men went into the water. Vessel went down in 12 minutes. Didn't see the first shark for about half an hour. Tiger. 13-footer. You know that when you're in the water, Chief? You tell by looking from the dorsal to the tail. What we didn't know was our bomb mission had been so secret, no distress signal had been sent.
There is also a movie called The Jersey Shore Shark Attack that came out in 2012, but it is not a modern adaptation of the events of 1916. Like, not really. There are elements sprinkled in, like the dynamite fishing and the 4th of July. At some point, a bartender brings out a dusty old book and tells the story of 1916, which was passed down by his grandfather. But for the most part, like 99% of it, it's not a history lesson. It's more of an attempt to capitalize on the success of the Jersey Shore reality TV show that was popular at the time. All of the characters are not so loosely inspired by the cast of Jersey Shore, and I don't think there's a single moment that isn't the absolute worst millennial cringe you've ever experienced. By all logic, it should just be a textbook sexploitation film, but it's not. Like, what is the point of a wet t-shirt contest if everyone is wearing a bikini under? You know what? I'm just gonna move on. If you go back to the previous episode, we've now done 3 consecutive stories that take place in coastal environments. 4 if you count the Jersey Shore shark attack. So let's keep it going with number 5. Only this time, the horror doesn't come from marine life. It comes from the human mind. The Lighthouse follows 2 lighthouse keepers assigned to a remote island off the coast of New England, the grizzled veteran Thomas Wake and the younger understudy Ephraim Winslow. As the weeks pass, tensions grow between the pair, and when a violent storm traps them on the island, reality begins to blur. Plagued by strange visions and increasingly obsessed with the forbidden lantern room at the top of the lighthouse, Winslow loses it, and the conflict between the two ultimately erupts into violence, with Winslow killing Wake and finally ascending the lighthouse steps to gaze directly into the light as his sanity completely collapses. But the true story that inspired the lighthouse is arguably even more tragic. In 1801, 2 wickies named Thomas Howell and Thomas Griffith began a month-long shift at the Smalls Lighthouse, located around 20 miles west of Wales. Like the country, not the animal. The original structure, completed in 1777, was little more than a platform and living quarters balanced atop towering oak supports, designed to withstand the strong currents below. The 2 men came from the nearby coastal villages of Solva and King Hurriet, and, so the legend goes, were known for the hostility between them, and for their regular arguments. A couple of weeks into the shift, Griffith became seriously ill following some kind of accident, although the details of this accident are unknown. Howell attempted to care for him while he continued to operate the lighthouse alone. But when his coworker's health didn't improve, Howell raised a distress signal in hopes of attracting the attention of a passing ship. You have to remember that they didn't have phones and couldn't just leave the lighthouse, because that would create an even bigger safety hazard for the incoming ships full of people who relied on the light to keep them from crashing into the rocks. So they were stuck there, no help came, and after weeks of suffering, Griffith died. This does make me wonder why they didn't have 3 lighthouse keepers instead of 2, but we'll get to the answer to that in a little bit. Fearing suspicion would fall on him if he disposed of the body in the ocean, especially given their reputation for fighting, and the fact that Griffith's family would probably want to bury him, Howell kept Griffith's corpse inside the lighthouse while he waited to be relieved. But another storm made it impossible to reach the lighthouse, which left Howell trapped there. The real villain in this one is the British weather patterns. As weeks passed, isolation began taking its toll on Howell. Food supplies ran low, and he found himself trapped inside the lighthouse with the smell of a decomposing body. Unable to endure it any longer, his former occupation as a cooper gave him the skills needed to build a crude coffin for Griffith, which he somehow dragged up to the gallery and left there for 3 weeks. The storms eventually damaged the coffin, exposing part of the corpse. Howell would apparently later recount Griffith's arm slipping free and striking against the lighthouse window, creating the illusion that the dead man was knocking to be let in. And now I suddenly want a Halloween animatronic just like that. According to Ivor Emlyn, the primary historian of this lighthouse, the storm's ferocity kept Howell trapped even longer than expected. For 4 months, it was found impossible to land at the rock. Vessels with strong boats and hardy crews were sent to the locality to try, if possible, to land, or if unable to land, to get within hailing distance and learn the nature of the disaster. Some sailors claimed they could see the outline of a figure standing on the gallery of the lighthouse, but the fact the light remained operational gave no indication of the severity of Howell's situation. After 4 months, a relief boat finally reached the Smalls Lighthouse. They returned Howell to the mainland and collected Griffith's body. It was said that Howell's ordeal had reduced him to such a state that when brought ashore, some of his friends hardly recognized him. As a result of the Smalls Lighthouse tragedy, Trinity House, the local lighthouse authority, changed the regulations so that lighthouses would now be manned by 3 keepers instead of 2. That way, there's always 1 person to man the lighthouse and 1 to send for help. This policy remained until the 1980s when lighthouses switched to automated systems. The 2019 film The Lighthouse is directed by Robert Eggers. Legend has it that if a woman starts hitting on Eggers, his wife appears in a raincoat, and in her best Willem Dafoe voice, she says, "Legger my Egger." Robert's brother Max had already begun developing the idea for the lighthouse before he came on board, framing it as a ghost story, and Robert Eggers finally joined the project after struggling to find financial backing for the Vivitch.
My brother worked on it for a while, and I asked if I could take a crack at it, and immediately I put it to a period setting, and I read a lot of stories about lighthouses and lighthouse keepers, and I came across the story of Smalls Lighthouse in Wales in the early 19th century, where there were 2 lighthouse keepers, both named Thomas, one older, one younger, and a storm comes to their lighthouse and they get stranded.
I wasn't able to confirm Griffith's age, but we'll take his word for it. Eggers kept the story in the 1800s, it really only works before the invention of communication equipment, but moved the setting from Wales to New England, probably because he grew up there and was familiar with the area. He even made the tagline for his first movie a New England folktale. He also tweaked the timeline a bit. Instead of one of the wikis being left with a rotting corpse, both keepers are tormented by the isolation of being trapped in the lighthouse. Eggers was particularly drawn to the detail of the two Smalls lighthouse keepers sharing the name Thomas, but probably for clarity, he decided to rename the younger keeper Ephraim Winslow, only to reveal later that his identity had been stolen, and his true name was actually Thomas Howard.
But the idea of the two Thomases could be a cool two-hander about identity that could very quickly become strange.
It seems he really likes stories with characters named Thomas, from Thomasine in The Vivitch, to the two Thomases in The Lighthouse, to the starting protagonist Thomas Hutter in Nosferatu. Can't wait for Eggers' gothic take on Thomas the Tank Engine. Despite a couple creative liberties, the DNA of the real Smalls Lighthouse story is still there. Both center on two wikis being trapped for weeks at a remote lighthouse. Both have storms that cut the men off from the outside world. And once they find themselves trapped, isolation begins to erode Winslow and Wake's sanity, just as it was reported to have done to Howell in 1801. In the film, we discovered that the younger lighthouse keeper stole his identity from a previous coworker who died. We never get confirmation if he killed the real Ephraim, which kind of mirrors the real life story of Thomas Howard. It's not 100% known that he didn't poison Griffith or something. We're just basically taking his word for it. Despite keeping the story initially grounded in the isolation and psychological strain of the Smalls Lighthouse tragedy, Eggers also pushes the film further into folklore and mythology. In The Lighthouse, Ephraim Winslow is seemingly tortured by evil seagulls believed to be the reincarnated souls of sailors and seduced by a mermaid who washes up on shore in his dream looking for companionship. Is it the isolation that drove him to imagine these things and pushed him to the brink of madness? Or was there really some ancient force waiting for them beside the sea? In addition to using the framework of the Smalls Lighthouse tragedy, Eggers drew heavily from Greek mythology and the maritime writings of Herman Melville. He told Den of Geek, "Early on we realized that there's going to be some classical mythology along with the New English and a generally British imported folklore into New England. The elder keeper, Wake, resembles Proteus, the shape-shifting old man of the sea from Greek mythology who guarded hidden knowledge and could foresee the future. Throughout the film, Wake keeps the light from the lantern room to himself while sharing drunken prophecies and sea lore, even seemingly foretelling Winslow's fate after he kills a seagull.
Black waves teeming with salt foam, to smother this young mouth with pungent slime, to choke ye, engorging your organs till ye turn blue and bloated with bilge and brine and can scream no more."
Perhaps the most overt comparison between Wake and Proteus comes when Winslow sees the mermaid that he's getting it on with suddenly shapeshift into his crusty and cackling coworker. Dude got catfished bad before we even called it that. Winslow, meanwhile, parallels Prometheus, the titan punished for stealing forbidden knowledge from the Greek gods. As the film progresses, Winslow becomes obsessed with the lantern, desperate to reach the light that Wake refuses to let him see. By the final scene, the lantern almost takes on the role of the forbidden enlightenment. And the final image of Winslow's body on the rocks mirrors the eternal punishment given to Prometheus, who was chained to a rock where an eagle endlessly picked out his liver. The film's theme of obsession is also owed in parts to Herman Melville's Moby Dick, which tells the story of Captain Ahab's fixation on the white whale. Like Ahab, Wake and Winslow are both consumed by their obsession with something they couldn't fully possess. Coincidentally, Moby Dick also seems to be a big influence on Jaws, with Quint playing the part of the obsessed sea captain. And like Steven Spielberg before him, Robert Eggers took special care to make his character's speech patterns as authentic as possible.
When I was doing research and trying to figure out how this character would talk, the most helpful author was a Maine-based author, Sarah Orne Jewett, who in the late 19th century was interviewing old sea captains, and they talked in this piratey dialect, so it is a real thing.
But for all of its mythology and supernatural ambiguity, Eggers captures the psychological breakdown that came with being trapped for weeks with your gross and annoying coworker. But in 2013, another adaptation of the story was released called The Jersey Shore Lighthouse Debacle. Okay, no, that didn't happen this time. But if you thought we were moving away from horror stories situated on the New England coast, think again. Because Robert Eggers grew up just 20 minutes away from the state of Maine, which is known for housing one of the genre's scariest antagonists.
Oh, well, I'm Pennywise, the dancing clown. Pennywise? Yes, me Georgie. Georgie, Meet Pennywise.
In both adaptations of It, the story begins in the town of Derry, where child disappearances are a fact of life that none of the adults in town seem to want to address. After a young Georgie Denbrough vanishes following an encounter with Pennywise, his older brother Bill and a group of outcasts known as the Losers Club experience their own terrifying encounters, pushing them to march into the sewers beneath town to defeat the creature themselves. But 27 years later, when the disappearances began again, they return to Derry to fulfill the promise that they made to each other, to finally destroy Pennywise once and for all. And in the miniseries, it's 30 years for some reason. Pennywise may be a supernatural creature, but many of the fears that it taps into were real societal fears of the day, like disturbed predators, missing children, and ordinary communities ignoring what's happening around them. And during the 1970s, few real-life figures embodied those fears more than John Wayne Gacy, who many children attending birthday parties in the Chicagoland area knew by his other name, Pogo the Clown. Long before the name John Wayne Gacy became known for his crimes, he appeared to many people around Chicago as a successful businessman and active member of the local community.
You know, everybody from the neighborhood, from the northwest suburbs of Chicago, knew John Gacy. He had a construction business called Painting, Decorating, and Maintenance. He was also a Democratic precinct captain in the Cook County Democratic Organization.
Born in 1942, Chicago, Gacy later described his childhood as deeply unhappy. According to his recollections, his father was a physically abusive alcoholic.
My dad's attitude was that I was dumb and stupid and I would never amount to anything. I just could never please him.
Gacy compared him to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, claiming that while sober, he was the nicest person you'd want to be around, but when he drank, he became aggressive and stubborn. His mother was remembered as the softer and more protective presence in the household. Another important presence in Gacy's childhood was the household basement, where his father reportedly spent much of his time alone. It's difficult not to see a parallel between the significance the basement held for his father and the role the crawl space under his own home would later play in his crimes.
To my dad, the basement was a sacred place. It was a hiding place for him.
In 1966, Gacy moved to Waterloo, Iowa with his wife and 2 children, where he became involved with the Jaycees, a civic leadership organization. It's basically somewhere where you would go to learn business skills without attending college. And no, having a name that rhymes with Jaycee is not required, that's just a coincidence. A year later, Gacy reportedly picked up 15-year-old Donald Voorhees Jr., the son of a fellow Jaycee, after seeing him hitchhiking. According to later testimony, the pair drank alcohol, watched stag films, aka silent adult movies, and engaged in non-consensual activities. I'm sure you can figure out exactly what. In March 1968, Donald told his father that Gacy had assaulted him, and the incident was reported to the police. Gacy was arrested and charged with sodomy. He underwent psychiatric evaluation and was reportedly diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, though he was still deemed fit to stand trial. Later that year, he was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. But after serving only around 18 months, Gacy was released on probation and allowed to serve his parole in Chicago. This is where he rebuilt his public image with alarming ease. He purchased a house near O'Hare Airport, got engaged to a woman named Carol Hoff, created his construction business, and became increasingly active in local politics. He probably fit right in with politicians because the world of politics is absolutely full of clowns. But overall, he portrayed himself as a pillar of the community.
I found a lot of good in young people working. It's just that they had to have somebody that was understanding. To a lot of them, I was almost like a father to them.
Investigators later concluded Gacy's first known murder took place in 1972 when he encountered 16-year-old Timothy McCoy at a bus station in Chicago.
So I asked him, I said, well, I'm not doing nothing. You want to go riding around?
According to Gacy's version of the events, the two returned to his house where they drank alcohol and SA occurred. Gacy claimed that he woke the following morning to see McCoy coming at him with a knife, and claims that he had to kill the boy as a means of self-defense. Rather than contacting the police, he buried the body in the crawl space under his home. Over the next 6 years, Gacy lured at least 32 more young men and teenage boys to his house using the promises of work, alcohol, money, or even friendship.
At the start, he talked about he was able to get these kids to his car. He could entice them with drugs or pay for a new job or something like that.
Many of the victims were reportedly restrained, assaulted, and murdered before being buried beneath Gacy's property or discarded in the Des Plaines River. The young men and boys that Gacy targeted were often vulnerable people. Hitchhikers who were stranded, boys from impoverished or fractured homes, and those desperate for monetary income who were easier to manipulate. During the mid-1970s, at the same time that Gacy was committing the murders, he also created the character of Pogo the Clown, a persona he reportedly performed as in local parades, charity events, political functions, and visiting children in hospitals. To many people in the community, Pogo was simply another extension of the public image Gacy had carefully built for himself. Friendly, approachable, and harmless.
The clowning was relaxation for me. I enjoyed entertaining kids. Like some people, they unwind in different ways, either by going out drinking or that. I could put on clown makeup and I was relaxed.
Yeah, I'm sure you did just enjoy entertaining kids, and it was not anything more sinister. But if the story ended there, who knows if Gacy ever would have been discovered, or if Stephen King would have been in the right time and place to create one of the most traumatizing villains ever to grace the page. The investigation that finally unraveled everything began in December 1978, 6 years into Gacy's spree, with the disappearance of 15-year-old Robert Piest. On the evening of December 11th, Piest told his mother that he was speaking to a contractor about a construction job that paid significantly more than his current position at a pharmacy in Des Plaines. But unfortunately, Piest was never seen alive again. During the investigation that followed, police learned that the contractor Robert had spoken to was none other than John Wayne Gacy. And that led them to discover Gacy's prior conviction in Iowa, which, as you can imagine, didn't look too good. So he quickly became the focus of the investigation. According to investigators, Gacy appeared unusually calm throughout the early stages of surveillance and questioning. At one point, police openly informed him that they would be monitoring him around the clock. But Gacy simply tried to maintain his control over the situation.
He was playing a cat and mouse game with the police department, trying to outfox them, trying to manipulate what they were doing, trying to show that he was in control of this situation.
After obtaining a warrant, searches uncovered suspicious items connected to the missing boys, but no bodies were turned up. And if not for the freezing Chicago climate, they may not have ever been discovered. On December 19, 1978, while officers were inside the home, the heating system switched on, and a foul odor reportedly drifted up from the crawl space beneath the house, which raises some serious questions about what it was like living there the entire winter. Because one time in college, some guy down the hall from me died, and it produces a very strong odor. And that was just one guy. Gacy had 29 on his property. Investigators returned with a second warrant and excavated bodies from beneath the foundations of the house, while media crews gathered outside the property. In total, he was eventually convicted of 33 murders, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in American history at the time. He was sentenced to death and remained on death row for over a decade before being executed in 1994.
Hey, I got news for you. I killed 33 times. You're only gonna kill me once. Gacy outsmarted him again.
Chilling stuff, much like the long Chicago winters. The story not only shook the nation, but went global. But America had become transfixed by the case, as newspapers and television broadcasts repeatedly circulated photographs of Gacy dressed as Pogo the Clown, permanently linking the image of the clown with one of the country's most infamous serial killers. Now, Stephen King has never officially stated that John Wayne Gacy was the direct inspiration for Pennywise, but King began writing it in 1980, just 2 years after Gacy was arrested in 1978, and the murder trial had begun on February 6, 1980. So Gacy and the haunting image of his Pogo the Clown persona were still all over the news at the time that King was first putting together his horror masterpiece. The reason that this qualifies under horror movies you didn't know were based on true stories and not horror movies that were obviously based on true stories is because it took him a long time to finish it. At over 1,100 pages, it's his second longest novel and wouldn't come out until 1986. Gacy had been convicted in March 1980, so it had been 6.5 years without much Gacy coverage. King released 11 other novels during that time. Dude was on an absolute tear in the 80s. I'm told there was a lot of snow involved. But as with Jaws and Final Destination, there are similarities that are difficult to ignore. Deeper ones than just killer clown likes kids. Pennywise uses playfulness and fun objects to lure children in before attacking them. While there's no evidence that Gacy ever used his clown persona to lure any of his known victims in, he has admitted that the costume allowed him to hide behind a character and behave in ways that he felt he couldn't as himself.
You know, when you clown, you're hiding your image. There are things that you could do that you wouldn't do as a person.
Clowns can get away with anything. Clowns can get away with murder.
These similarities continue with the victims themselves. In it, children continue disappearing around Derry, while adults either fail to notice what's happening or refuse to confront it. Pennywise specifically preys upon children who are emotionally vulnerable or frightened.
I'll take all of you, and I'll feast on your flesh as I feed on your fear.
The Losers Club in particular are all children who exist on the margins of Derry in some way, either bullied, neglected, abused, or some combination of the three. Many of the young men and boys targeted by Gacy were similarly vulnerable. Hitchhikers, teenagers isolated from any support system, or young people struggling financially.
She was poor. Father was the janitor. This was poor town.
Not all of Gacy's victims necessarily come from troubled backgrounds, but several of the missing persons reports were initially dismissed by authorities as teenage runaways. Even some of the later disappearances from 1976 to 1978 were ignored by law enforcement, which seems illogical given that so many teens had already gone missing and not returned. In It, there's a supernatural explanation for the town's indifference to the preponderance of missing posters, which in the miniseries is likened to a disease.
It's a disease, Bev.
None of them wants to know.
It's too horrible, so they act like it doesn't even happen.
The adults of Derry ignore the violence in their town, and they're physically unable to see Pennywise and its manipulations of reality. It feels like a metaphor for that failure to fully acknowledge what was happening in Chicago in the 70s, which allowed the killings to continue. Apparently, when 19-year-old John Sick disappeared in January 1977, Gacy used his goodwill with the community to convince police that John had sold him his car in order to get enough money to leave town, and the police believed him. Which is weird, because why didn't they realize that you could use a car to leave town? But Gacy wasn't the only clown from our world that King channeled into his sewer-dwelling nightmare maker. And the page count of It isn't the only thing that comes supersized.
They said to make it huge! It's supersized!
Pennywise is just one form of the shape-shifting alien It, who often changes itself to cater to the specific fears of the victim. While Gacy himself was not known to have any shape-shifting abilities, he reportedly used authority and familiarity to lower the guard of his victims, including driving a vehicle that resembled an unmarked police car with a red light attached, and carrying police badges from different departments.
And he had some 50-some different badges from different police departments. He had a black leather jacket that he wore all the time that would very much look like a plainclothes police officer attire.
They thought they were getting arrested, and it turns out they were being kidnapped.
Is that too much of an interpretational stretch? Maybe. But I think there is something to be said about King's use of the sewer system beneath Derry as Pennywise's lair, where the missing children are eventually discovered floating in the darkness below the town. Just as investigators eventually discovered that many of Gacy's victims had been buried beneath the crawl space, the garage, and even under the garden barbecue of his suburban home. There are also a lot of overt examples of basements being a source of horror throughout the It franchise. In Chapter 1 of the novel, Georgie is afraid to retrieve the turtle wax from the basement. In Chapter 7, the leper that attacks Eddie crawls out of the basement of an old house. As an adult, Eddie is haunted by crickets that he can't get rid of from his basement. In the miniseries, Richie encounters It as a werewolf in the school basement, and in It Chapter 2, Bill is faced with a terrifying specter of his dead brother in a flooded basement.
You lied, and I died. You lied, and I died!
I'm not really sure why Stephen King has never addressed the parallels between his character and Gacy. As far as I can tell, no one has ever directly asked him about it, or at least not in a published interview. When asked about his inspiration, he just says that he found clowns terrifying and believed that children did too. But there is a different clown that definitely left an imprint on It and all of its adaptations, and I've covered him here on Horror History as well. His name is Ronald McDonald. Compare this clip from the very first Ronald McDonald commercial.
Why? Isn't that McDonald's hamburger delicious?
Mom told me never to talk to strangers.
To the conversation Pennywise has with Georgie in the very first chapter of It. The miniseries uses nearly identical dialogue.
Hi, Georgie. Aren't you going to say hello? Oh, come on, bucko. Don't you want a balloon?
I'm not supposed to take stuff from strangers. My dad said so.
Well, your mother's right as always, but I'm Ronald McDonald. Give me a McDonald's shake.
Very wise of your dad, Georgie. Very wise indeed. I, Georgie, am Pennywise the Dancing Clown. You are Georgie. So now we know each other.
His fascination with Ronald McDonald is something that King's expanded on. He was sitting beside a man dressed as Ronald McDonald during a flight, which he said was strangely memorable rather than outright terrifying. But it reinforced something he already understood about clowns. Beneath the exaggerated smiles and forced cheerfulness, there's something strangely uncanny about them.
I'm sitting in first class, and the door opens again and Ronald McDonald gets on the airplane. And you think, what if this plane crashes? I'm gonna die next to a clown.
I mentioned in my last episode of Horror Movies You Didn't Know Were Based on True Stories that King's initial idea for his novella, The Body, which Stand By Me is adapted from, had come from his own early life. King returned to those childhood experiences while writing It, using them to shape the children's fears, friendships, and experiences.
When I wrote It, I drew on a lot of things from my own childhood. A lot of what I was doing was trying to articulate the things that made me afraid as a kid. And I took a lot of the things that I loved when I was a kid.
Like many members of the Losers Club, King came from a broken family. His father walked out on them when he was 2 years old, leaving his mom to raise Stephen and his older brother on her own, depending on relatives in the Midwest for shelter. The situation sounds a lot like Arlene and Ben Hanscom, who find themselves in Derry because they have no money and Arlene's sister takes them in. When King was 11, his family moved to Durham, Maine. But Derry isn't based on his childhood hometown. In 1980, the same year that he began work on it, he and his wife moved to Bangor, Maine. I guess when you're planning on writing a complete banger, it feels like destiny to move to a town named Bangor. Many important locations from the story are actually landmarks from the 1700s logging town. The most notable is the Derry Standpipe, modeled after the Thomas Hill Standpipe. This is basically a huge water tower, and in the book, Stan Uris has a scary encounter with it, taking the form of a group of kids who once drowned there. The Paul Bunyan statue that comes to life and attacks Richie Tozier can really be found in front of Bangor's Civic Center in honor of the town's lumber industry. Much of the kids' free time is spent playing and letting their imaginations run wild in the Barrens, a ravine where they build dams and fend off bullies. It sits along the Kenduskeag Stream, a tributary of the Penobscot River. Both of these waterways are real locations in Bangor, and the names are not changed at all, both having Native American etymology. The Derry Public Library is not only Ben's sanctuary from the bullies as a kid, but Mike Hanlon's place of work as an adult, where several important scenes play out. I know it's easy to just say, okay, doesn't every town have a library? But according to the library themselves, the description in the book lines up with the features of Bangor Public Library. The list kinda goes on and on. Dysart's Truck Stop is the Tracker Brothers Truck Depot. The Chinese restaurant where the losers have their reunion, Jade of the Orient, is a restaurant called the Oriental Jade, which I want to go to, but it's really far away. As for the iconic sewer drain, in the book, it's on the intersection of Jackson and Witcham. Real Bangor has a Jackson Street, but not a Witcham Street. But that won't stop the local Stephen King tour companies from trying to spook you with a really bad Halloween decoration anyway. Now, there is no Jersey Shore clown murder movie that I could find, but the next thing I'm going to talk about does involve a vacation home, which happens to be the setting for completely unexplained acts of violence.
Is Tamara here?
The 2008 horror film The Strangers follows a young couple, James Hoyt and Kristen McKay, who arrive at an isolated vacation home following a friend's wedding. Late that night, a young woman knocks on the door asking for someone named Tamara. Although the couple tell her that she has the wrong house, the encounter marks the beginning of a terrifying ordeal, where 3 masked intruders silently torment them while cutting them off from help and any means of escape. By dawn, they've been captured and tortured, with no explanation for the actions of the titular strangers. I know this video is called Horror Movies You Didn't Know Were Based on True Stories, and for The Strangers, you actually do know because the movie tells you right at the beginning, but I don't think many people know much beyond that. One of the earliest inspirations behind The Strangers came from a childhood memory of a real incident that stuck with writer-director Brian Bertino for years. I lived in a house that was very similar to the one in the film, very remote, in between towns, and surrounded by fields. We were the latchkey generation of parents being out and kids left alone. One night, when I was 8, my 11-year-old sister and I heard a knock on the door. She answered, and these people asked if our parents were home. She lied and said, "Oh, my dad's in the shower." At the time, it seemed strange but harmless, but Bertino later discovered that the people had reportedly been going door to door throughout the area, checking which houses were empty before breaking into them. A pretty unsettling memory, especially for children who likely didn't understand the danger of it at the time. But Bertino took that already unsettling real-life incident and pushed it somewhere much darker in The Strangers.
Why are you doing this to us? Because you were home.
Bertino's childhood experience wasn't the only real-life influence behind The Strangers. Another major inspiration came from one of the most infamous true crime cases in American history, the Tate-LaBianca murders committed by members of the Manson family during the summer of 1969. Cult leader Charles Manson had spent much of his life in and out of prison, but by the late 1960s, he had gathered a devoted group of followers living together at Spahn Ranch in California. Former family members later claimed that Manson would keep his followers heavily dosed on LSD while remaining comparatively sober himself, allowing him to maintain total control over the group while encouraging total obedience. Manson also became increasingly obsessed with the idea of an approaching apocalyptic race war he referred to as Helter Skelter, a phrase he took from the 1968 song of the same name by the Beatles. Around the same time, he had ambitions of becoming a successful musician himself, and apparently became fixated on music producer Terry Melcher, after being introduced to him by a talent scout. The scout had encouraged Melcher to record Manson, but after meeting with him and listening to him play, Melcher had said no. Manson, according to his followers, saw this as a betrayal and was angered by the rejection. According to later testimony from Manson family cultist Susan Atkins, Manson chose the house at 10,050 Cielo Drive because Melcher had previously lived there. Atkins claimed that Manson wanted to instill fear into Melcher because Terry had given him word on a few things and it never came through with them. But by August 1969, the house was occupied by actress Sharon Tate, who was 8 months pregnant, and her husband, movie director Roman Polanski, along with several friends staying at the house that evening. Late on the night of August 8th, Manson instructed several members of his cult, including Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian, to travel to the house and, according to Watson's later testimony, make sure that everybody is dead and that it is done as gruesome as you can do it. The victims themselves had no connection to Manson and no understanding of why they were being targeted. Shortly after midnight, the group arrived at the isolated property and cut the phone lines before entering the grounds. A teenager named Stephen Parent, who had been visiting the caretaker of the property, was killed while attempting to leave the estate. Inside the house, Sharon Tate and her guests were attacked and killed over the course of the night. Some victims were restrained in the living room while others attempted to flee. Before leaving the scene, members of the group wrote the word pig on the front door, using blood taken from the victims. The violence continued the following night when members of the Manson family targeted another home belonging to supermarket executive Leno LaBianca and his wife, Rosemary. The couple were tied up inside of their own house before being killed, and once again, messages were written on the walls and refrigerator, including the phrases "Rise," "Death to pigs," and "Helter Skelter." The murders quickly became one of the most infamous crimes in American history. Although Manson had not personally carried out the attacks, investigators and prosecutors argued that he had manipulated and instructed his followers into committing them. So Manson, Watson, Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten were arrested and convicted for their roles in the murders, receiving death sentences that were later commuted to a life sentence. Except for Van Houten, who got out on parole after serving 53 years. Unlike Leslie Van Houten, who directly participated in the LaBianca murders, Linda Kasabian avoided prosecution after agreeing to testify against Manson and the other family members. Now I know what everyone is thinking. Is there a Jersey Shore-style adaptation of the Tate-LaBianca murders? Unfortunately, no, but there is something even better. Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, a comedy film telling an alternate history version where Manson's plans fail, Sharon Tate survives, and Manson never becomes a cult figure. A Hollywood happy ending for a Hollywood hit. But before Tarantino's tampered take, Brian Bertino set out to write a story of believable brutality, based on the real biographical backstory. Coming at the end of an already turbulent decade, the Tate-LaBianca murders became viewed by many as symbolically marking the end of the swinging 60s. The idea that strangers could invade your home at random and commit acts of extreme violence shattered the sense of safety many people had associated with suburban America. The randomness of the attacks and the victims' complete lack of understanding about why they were being targeted became one of the most disturbing aspects of the case for Bertino. In an interview with Medium, he said, "I was thinking about the Tate murders and realizing that these detailed descriptions had painted a story of what it was like in the house with the victims. But none of the victims knew about the Manson family or why it was happening to them. So I got really fascinated with telling the victim's tale." Bertino took elements from both real-life events, his own childhood scare and the tragedies that happened in 1968 in Hollywood, and reworked them into The Strangers. James and Kristen have no idea who the masked intruders are, why they've been chosen, or what they ultimately want from them. Much like the victims at Cielo Live and the LaBianca residence, they're simply trapped inside of a home while strangers move through the property, committing acts of seemingly senseless violence. There are even smaller parallels throughout the film. In both the Tate-LaBianca murders and The Strangers, victims are restrained with rope inside the living rooms and messages are written on the walls in red. But Bertino also makes some important creative choices. Unlike the Manson family murders, there's no larger ideology, cult leader, or apocalyptic motive. At least not one that we're ever made aware of. The masked intruders never attempt to justify their actions.
I don't necessarily find the way that information in some movies is kind of shoehorned in doesn't make it scarier for me. I've said before, if I wake up in the middle of the night and there's someone standing at the foot of my bed with an axe, I'm not like, tell me what happened. Tell me what messed with your mind to get you here. Like, I'm just scared.
Which I think is true, especially if this were to happen to you in real life, but it's also unsatisfying for a movie. When I encounter a piece of art, I want it to make me feel things and make me think. Some of my favorite works of all time have an element of ambiguity. But when you don't attempt to have any substance in the film and then you just come right out and say, yeah, it was random, it removes any element of intelligent discussion. My review is so underrated. Imagine you're next, but with no story or point. So the only story element that is really worth discussing with The Strangers is the film's influences. Much like the speculation surrounding the real-life inspirations behind Jaws and It, many viewers have also connected this one to another true crime case, known as the Ketty Cabin murders. Brian Bertino himself has never publicly confirmed it as an influence, but the similarities between the isolated cabin murders and the events of The Strangers have led many to draw comparisons. The Ketty Cabin case was an unsolved series of murders that took place over the night of April 11th and into April 12th, 1981 in the small resort town of Ketty, California. The attacks occurred inside cabin 28, where 36-year-old Sue Sharp, her 15-year-old son John, and John's friend Dana Wingate were discovered inside the living room, not following the directions of the living room. Investigators found the victims had been restrained using electrical cords and medical tape before being taken out. What made the crime especially disturbing was that 3 other children inside the cabin survived the attack, completely unharmed. Sue's younger children were asleep in a nearby bedroom and reportedly only discovered the scene the following morning. Sue's youngest daughter, 12-year-old Tina Sharp, was initially missing from the cabin, leading investigators to believe that she had been abducted during the attack. Her remains would not be found until 3 years later in 1984, over 50 miles away in Plumas County. The circumstances, the isolated cabin setting, and the unsolved mystery surrounding whoever entered the house turned this crime into one of California's most infamous open cases. Over the years, investigators explored numerous theories ranging from personal disputes to substance trafficking to possible connections with serial criminals. Despite decades of investigation, no one was ever officially charged with the murders. Although, in 2018, investigators reportedly recovered DNA evidence from the tape found at the crime scene that was linked to a known suspect. Much like The Strangers, the horror of Ketty Cabin comes from the feeling that evil could strike anyone at any time. Whether Brutino consciously drew from the case or not, it's easy to understand why many people continue to connect the two stories. I've now done 3 editions of this Horror Movies You Didn't Know Were Based on True Stories miniseries. I really need an acronym for that. How about HMYDKWBOTS? But the thing I always find myself wondering when making HMYDKWBOTS is why some stories wear their bot's status like a badge of honor, while others seem to do everything to hide it. I think it's probably different on a case-by-case basis, but let me know your thoughts in the comments, and any suggestions you have to be covered in future episodes. If you enjoyed this video, definitely check out that HMYDKWBOTS playlist on the left. But first, remember to subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week, ring the death bell for all notifications, and I will see you in the next one. Assuming we both survive.